Good day, babies. We are the group 4 and today we will discuss about the following topics under the appropriate methods of authentic assessment. So first we have the considerations, second is the teacher observation, third is the student self-report, and lastly is the peer rating. So before we start, I wanted to ask you something. Have you ever wondered what are the methods of effective learning outcome or the development of assessment tools are? We will talk about that later. But first, we will discuss the meaning of effective learning outcome. So, effective learning outcome is a learning that is associated with feelings rather than knowledge or skills. It is somehow connected to the appropriateness of assessment methods because it is a way of collecting information to determine the extent to which the students demonstrate the desired learning outcomes. There are three different methods of assessing effective learning outcomes, and these are the teacher observation, the student self-report, and the peer rating. So why do you think teachers only rely on their observation and student self-report? It is because, ironically, affective traits are not directly observable, so it is best to infer from the student's behavior or what they say about themselves and their views on the others. There are several psychological measures to assess affective traits, but they are seldom used in the classroom. Hence, that is the reason why teachers rely only on their observation and student self-report. Let us now proceed to Macmillan's considerations. First, we have the emotions and feelings. So emotions and feelings are not stable attitudes of young children and during early adolescence. Why? Because most of them are unpredictable. So what can we do to obtain a valid and desirable student's emotions and feelings? First, we conduct a different assessment over a considerable amount of time. In this case, the teacher can obtain dominant or prevalent effect of the students. If you consider only a single assessment, there is a high probability that what you assess is not an entire sign of the trait. Hence, it is better to measure repeatedly over several periods of time. When assessing affective traits, it is advisable to use several approaches as much as possible. We do not rely on a single approach because of its limitations. Example, when utilizing student self-report, the student can hide his feelings and he can fake his answers, and this can greatly affect the result. In this case, we can verify the result using teacher observation. If the result is not consistent with the observation of the teacher, then it is invalid. However, if the result is consistent with the observation of the teacher, stronger and valid result can be inferred from it. Dobbins, Jingley, Burble, and Cassidy found something. Well, they found out that low-performing students tend to over-report behavior more than high-performing students, especially when they perceive specific levels of performance that are socially desirable. Interesting, right? Let us now proceed to the last consideration, which is the result. Do you need an individual result or a group result? You decide whether you need an individual result or group result. The purpose is related and significant to the methods used in assessing affective traits. For example, if the purpose of assessing the affective trait of students for reporting performance to parents, then you should consider individual results. Several methods of collecting information are needed over a period of time, and records are kept to verify teachers' observation. On the other hand, you can use group result when the purpose of assessment is for improvement of classroom instruction. Moving on with the methods of assessing learning. Number one, we have the teacher observation. It is an observation technique which was already introduced in the Assessment of Learning 1 as a tool of assessing students' performance during instruction or during formative assessment. In this section, the emphasis of teacher observation is to make a systematic record on the observation about the presence or absence of effective outcomes. There are 3 steps in using teacher's observation. 1. Determine in advance the specific behavior to the targets. 2. Develop a list of positive and negative behaviors. 3. Decide the type of observation you want to use. There are 2 methods of assessing effective learning outcomes using teacher observation. We have the unstructured and structured observation. So unstructured observation is also known as the open-ended observation. Here, the teacher does not use any rating scale or checklist to record observations. It allows the teacher more freedom to record what information is to be observed and how it is recorded. Recording observations can be done through note-taking, mental note-taking, or diary keeping. The teacher should have determined in advance the effective traits to be observed. However, it is also important to note that the teacher should also consider other actions that may as well reflect on effective traits. Therefore, there should be at least guidelines and characteristics of the effective traits to be assessed. In this type of observation, the teacher monitors his students in a natural classroom setting. When we say natural classroom setting, it is taking notes of the observations about the classroom environment and the behaviors and characteristics of students being assessed. The teacher must use simple descriptions such as always ask questions, keep standing and going around, or talking with seatmates. Even so, he must avoid making conclusions about what he observes using terms such as lonely, happy, motivated, and etc. Using unstructured observation allows the teacher to quickly determine effective traits and utilize them to make adjustment in the instructional processes. We have here an example of anecdotal record which is from Mr. Gabuyo, and the name of the student is John Emil R. Palma. So the anecdote says that when Renz came to school this morning, he seemed very tired and slouching in his seat. He did not take part in class discussion and showed no interest in what was discussed. This is very unusual of him because he often participates and monopolizes the class discussion. We can see that anecdotal record can be utilized by the teacher, of course, when using unstructured observation type. It is a description of students' behavior or a report of observational behavior incidents. Then we have the structured observation. It is another way of assessing the effective traits of students. This type of observation is somewhat different from unstructured observation because it requires more time for the preparation of materials and the process of recording the observation. It usually involves with the utilization of checklists, rating scale, and sometimes the use of rubrics. With the behaviors listed, it allows the observer to focus on more important effect to be assessed. The teacher only has to mark in different formats through the checklist or through the rating scale. Using the checklist, the teacher indicates a behavior by marking yes or no, observed or not observed, presence or absence, and etc. With the use of rating scale, terms such as always, often, sometimes, seldom, and never are utilized. In structured observation, recording is more systematic because the teacher will only attend on the predetermined aspects of effective traits. In this case, a more reliable and valid information among different observers is easier to obtain.
Hi everyone, my name is Arvi Anastumata and I will discuss another type of assessment tool in the affective domain. But before that, let me give you a brief introduction. Based on the book of Navarro, there are only two types of assessment tools in the affective domain, namely the self-report and the rating scales. Under the rating scales, there are three types: semantic differential scale, Thurstone and Likert scale, and checklist. On the other hand, Gabuyo presented three types of assessment tools: the teacher observation, student self-report, and peer rating. Since the two books have their own versions of assessment tools, we will try to blend them with one another, and I hope we can blend them well in order for us to fully utilize these tools in the future. The teacher observation, the first assessment tool, has already been discussed. Now let's proceed to the student self-report, or simply self-report. Self-report is the most common assessment tool in the affective domain. According to Gabuyo, self-report allows students to express their feelings, attitudes toward a given specific classroom activity. At first look, we can say that it is the easiest tool to use since we would only require our students to write his or her thoughts about a certain topic, like what lesson or topic do you like most or least in the subject assessment of learning, or why do you like or dislike the subject English. In using this measurement tool, we must use our persuasive skills to motivate our students to respond properly and seriously so that the information gathered is reliable. There are two methods of assessing learning outcomes using self-report: the interview method and the questionnaire or survey method. The interview method is used by the teacher to inquire if the students understand or retain information given to them. It is also used to clarify information to avoid confusion. This method is time-consuming, but all the time spent is worth it if you gain the trust of your students, since they will eventually share their beliefs or feelings about a certain fact, activity, or situation. Some examples of interview method are casual conversations, individual or group interviews, and roundtable discussions. Unlike the interview method, the questionnaire or survey method is very efficient to use since it does not require too much time and effort to conduct. There are two formats of assessing learning outcomes using questionnaire survey method: the constructed response format and the selected response format. In the constructed response format, the students are required to answer a question through words, phrases, or sentences. Under the constructed response format, there are two types of item: the completion item and the essay item. The completion item is done by supplying words or phrases to complete a certain statement. For example, I am interested in history because, or I think science is. Based on the example, the teacher will ask the students about their feelings regarding history or science, then they will respond by completing the said statement. In the essay item, the teacher allows the students to write freely about a topic. Some may give specific instructions to follow. Selected response format is composed of questions that typically has one answer. Under this type of format are three types: semantic differential scale, rating scale, and checklist. Rating scale is a set of categories designed to elicit information from the participants. The most common rating scale is the Likert scale, wherein the students are required to mark whether they strongly agree, disagree, or strongly disagree towards something. Each category has a corresponding scale value, which will be used later on for the interpretation of data. Thurstone scale is another type of rating scale wherein the individual will mark an item whether he or she is in favor of the given statement. The scaleogram analysis, or also known as Guttman scaling, is another type of rating scale. The major characteristic of this rating scale is that the one response will predict the responses to the other items.
Good day everyone, I am Riza Gines Franco and I will be talking about the semantic differential scale of selected response format under the student self-report. Semantic differential scale, as I've said, is another type of selected response format in which a pair of adjectives are used to provide connections with feelings, beliefs, and opinions that can be measured by degrees of agreement to show both sides of opposite directions and intensity. The teacher let the students check in between each pair of adjectives that describe the positive or the negative aspects of a given trait. When developing the semantic differential scale, we have to consider the following. First is, bipolar objectives are simple and economical means of obtaining data about students' reaction. Next is, ratings on bipolar adjective scale tend to be correlated, and the three basic dimensions of response account for the most of the covariation in ratings. And lastly, some adjective scales are most pure measures of evaluation. Examples of adjectives used in terms of their dimension: difficulty, easy to difficult; potency, powerful to powerless; and activity, slow to fast. And for example of semantic differential scales, mathematics test for an instance, we can use the adjectives easy and difficult. Or in evaluating a presentation, we can use adjectives like or dislike. So there are numbers or digits between these two opposite objectives that serves as a label for scaling the evaluation. So usually, positions marked 0 serves as the neutral, which is found at the center or in the middle of two opposite adjectives, one as slightly, 2 as quite, and 3 as extremely. For an instance, when evaluating a basketball player, you can use adjectives strong and weak. So we have 0 at the center, which is the neutral. We have 1, 2, 3 for the positive adjective that is strong, and another 1, 2, 3 as a negation or the opposite that is weak. So if you are to label the basketball player 1 on the strong side, you mean slightly strong, and if 2, you mean quite strong, and if 3, extremely strong. And that goes the same way on the left side or on the weak side, slightly weak, quite weak, and extremely weak. Another type of selected response format is checklist. Checklist is the easiest tool to develop compared to rating scale and semantic differential scale. It consists of simple items that the students or teachers mark present or absent on a certain attribute that describes the affective traits. According to Macmillan of 2001, there are 3 steps in constructing a checklist. First is enumerate all the attributes and characteristics you wish to observe relative to concept being assessed. Next is arrange these attributes as shopping lists of characteristics. And lastly, ask students to mark attributes or characteristics which are present and leave blank to those which are not. A sample of checklist is for a structured observation in a classroom. So you have to make a list of observation, and your item or option that it can be yes or no. For instance, the list of your observations are the following: students will attend classes on time, students will submit assignments on time, students will actively participate on classroom discussions, students will follow instructions during examination, and students will ask questions during classroom discussions. So you just have to put a check in either yes or no to whichever is applicable on each item respectively.
Peer rating is the least method to be used in assessing effective learning outcomes. In this method, the students are asked to assess or judge their classmates' behavior. It can be used to assess interpersonal traits. There are two approaches. The first one is Guess Who approach. In Guess Who approach, students are asked to write the names of their classmates who is described in the form. This approach used to obtain peer judgment or peer ratings, requiring students to name their classmates who best fit each of a series of behavior description. The number of nominations students receive on each characteristic indicates their reputation in the peer group. Let us now proceed in sociometric approach. This approach calls for nominations, but students indicate their choice of companions for some groups it receive serves as all indication of their total social acceptance. Sociometric approach also used to assess social structure of the class and interaction patterns among the students. Using this approach, it allows the teacher to learn about the social acceptance and the liking patterns of the popular students and social isolates.